Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to a fairly downbeat assessment. We had another almost all-nighter. I think I got home at 3 o'clock, where yesterday all the Democrats, along with two Republicans, fought against the so-called rescission package. And now to refresh people, Congress, based upon the Constitution, is the sole entity that has the power of the purse, the ability to decide where we spend federal dollars. We had put a bipartisan budget together that this administration has basically was trying to say, no, we want to override the budget and rescind certain dollars that Congress had already approved. About $9 billion was the total. It broke down into two categories. One was it took around $8 billion away from foreign assistance. This is a very small percentage, way less than 1% of our overall spend. This has been supported by the military, the intelligence community, and in many ways what you've seen Donald Trump do in 6 months is destroy 75 years of American soft power. Our strength comes not only from our economy and our military, but it comes from the fact that we've been viewed as the good guys around the world. And we've been able to help, whether it's, for example, on cutting back on the spread of AIDS, on helping nations rebuild, particularly in Africa, on making sure that those Afghans who worked with our forces were protected. Well, most of that has now been eliminated. Dramatic cutbacks on faith-based organizations that do assistance for starving kids, all of the federal support gone. Support for those Afghan veterans who served with our military, that support gone. Ability, you've heard me talk about the war in Sudan, support for making sure that people are fed there in a war where more people die than every day than in Ukraine and Gaza combined, gone. And this is not only morally wrong, but it's completely counter to our national security interest. Africa, for example, and I had an amendment last night to replace some of the Africa funding. Africa will have 25% of the world's population by 2050. Virtually all of the critical rare earth minerals that we need so much are mined in Africa. And all of our soft power support is being taken away. This is a gift to China because China can come in behind us and literally for pennies on the dollar say, we will now help you. We will help build your new road with Chinese labor, by the way. And that, again, sets us back in a lot of these countries. And as these countries buy Chinese technology and Chinese equipment, we wonder why. Well, these countries no longer believe they can count on America. Matter of fact, I read this morning of, I think there's a poll done in 25 nations, 23 of which now believe that China, not the United States, is the world's preeminent economic power. And whether it is the up and down on the tariff policy or this kind of retreat from soft power, this is making America less safe, and it is a long-term catastrophic decision. The other part of the decision was over $1 billion cut from public broadcasting. That means $100 million less to Virginia's NPR stations, to Virginia's public TV stations. And many communities, it is that public TV broadcast or the public radio broadcast that puts out emergency notification. You would think after the tragedy in Texas and after we saw the destruction by Hurricane Helene that folks wouldn't have walked away from this commitment to public broadcasting. But that was all cut out. So if folks wonder what happened to Sesame Street or what happened to Masterpiece Theater, depending on where your age cohort is, that was due to this, again, I think, ill-fated, cheap effort by all but two Republicans to basically decimate public broadcasting. And in rural communities, it is going to be particularly difficult where there's not a lot of other options. So you combine the awful bill that's cutting rural hospitals, now the means for public emergency notification. This is a double whammy to rural Virginia. And rural Virginia voted overwhelmingly for Donald Trump. So if people wonder who brought him this, Donald Trump and a group of feckless Republicans who quietly had said, oh my gosh, we don't think it makes sense to override the appropriations process. But when push came to shove last night, late in the evening, all but two Republicans fell in line and supported Donald Trump, who basically had threatened to withdraw his support from anybody who didn't go along with this process. What happened to an independent Republican Party that was actually based in some level of conservative principles Now it is entirely a bend the knee to Donald Trump, who frankly dismisses Congress and more often than not is willing to dismiss the Constitution. On a slightly more positive note, the Intelligence Committee, of which I was chair and now vice chair, did pass out in a broad bipartisan vote, 15-2, the Intelligence Authorization Bill. This does a lot to support the men and women in our intelligence community, but one of the areas I want to highlight is we are moving much more aggressively on cyber protection. I'm a big believer that we've got to both up our game on cyber defense, but we also have to have a cyber offensive capability. We cannot continually be the victim and not be willing to push back against our adversaries. So the Republican Chairman Tom Cotton and I have set up a cyber working group that will lay out what a cyber offensive strategy ought to look like for America. And combined with the Intel Authorization Bill, this action will have much more to say about this. One good piece in the Intel bill, you may recall Salt Typhoon. Salt Typhoon was the Chinese effort that hacked into all of our telecommunication companies, basically allowing them, the Chinese, to listen in on any phone number they go after and literally even read your non-encrypted texts. I've been amazed that Americans haven't gotten more upset about this. We still don't know if the Chinese penetration has been eradicated and kicked out of the networks. So we were able to put in my piece of legislation that would require minimum cyber standards for telecom companies. We have that already for our utilities. We have it already for our financial sector. It's time as well that we have minimum standards for our telecom industry as well. And it's in the bill right now. We'll see if it gets through the whole process, but I was proud that it received such broad bipartisan support in the Intelligence Committee. The reason we need this, and one of the things that does concern me though, is we have seen a gross politicization of the intelligence community. And when we see the intelligence community politicized, I've called repeatedly for Director Gabbard to be fired. I think she is not honoring her commitment to not politicize the intelligence community. We saw earlier in the year where long-term intelligence professionals were told to change their conclusion. This was on a report that was about a bad guy gang, Tren del Agua, in Venezuela and their ties to the Venezuelan government. This is a bad group, but the intelligence community did not feel like they were directly tied or controlled entirely by the Maduro regime in Venezuela, which are also bad guys. And the intelligence professionals who reached that conclusion were said, you know, this might embarrass the president, so change your conclusion. They refused to, and they were fired. When you start monkeying and changing and altering intelligence, you get a corrupt product. That was what led us into the war in Iraq. Nobody wants to repeat that mistake, but we've now got a political leadership at the Director of National Intelligence that's basically demanding loyalty to Trump rather than speaking truth to power. We saw more evidence of this literally as recently as Sunday when Director Gabbard appeared at the Turning Point political conference by the right-wing zealot Charlie Kirk, and appearing at that conference, she basically trashed the whole intelligence workforce, saying that she's trying to root out anybody that is not loyal to the Trump regime. That is the opposite of what our intelligence professionals. They, like our military, take an oath of office to protect the Constitution, not protect or simply pay curry to a individual president, in this case Donald Trump. So we're going to continue to fight and call out this politicization. I've been hugely disappointed that Republican senators who all say to me privately, gosh, we hate this, have not been willing to raise their voice. But I'm going to stay on this. Politicization of the intelligence community will be a disaster for our national security and, again, make our nation less safe. So with that, why don't I turn it over to Laura and, again, be happy to take your questions.